got to that, the board agreed on all of that. It was the last $400,000 that I thought was better served with some other items that eventually came into Proposition 2, and that's specifically the auditorium seating. So there are, I believe, a lot of reasons why that is important. Obviously, my fellow board members disagreed, and so it's just part of the process. And I think it's important because it wasn't a process by which we said, let's just do all this stuff because we like it. There was a debate on like that for almost everything that we did, with certain exceptions. Transportation Center probably being one of those. So we had some very spirited debate, not just among the board members, but also the community members, to go through each thing. Things like, I'll use an example, a TV studio. We have it. But there's some things that we could do to make it better. The community was very clear in what they said, and that's not one of the really important things. So that's not in either Prop 1 or Prop 2. So we did this for 100, 200 different items. I disagreed with my fellow board members on that last piece. It is in Proposition 2, so naturally I'm supporting Proposition 2 as well. But that's the reason. It's not something I believe in the balance of it, 99%. In fact, I believe in 100% now, because that's what we do. We have deliberation, we have debate, we have a vote, and that's what the democratic process is all about. So that's why I voted for this.
Ring is handing out the financial information and anticipated cost of Proposition 2, listed in two ways, a full value and a assessed value.
Guys, you can stay standing, we can feel better, it's up to you, because I'm going to be standing, so. And then we're going to be collecting cards, so people who in the wandering, if you raise your hand up with a question, please do. And while I'm waiting to get questions, I want to keep it on going, because we are very limited, I think there's going to be a lot of questions. So I would like to keep it on moving. And I think there's a couple of follow-ups just in terms of the information to share. The first one that kind of jumps out at me is about $8.1 million capital reserve. We're talking about $800,000 for the transportation, and that leaves about $7.1 million in that capital reserve, which puts you about $800,000 to $900,000 short on your project for Proposition 1. Because if you do the math, it's about $8 million with no interest. Sorry, it's correct. That's what I'm doing. I'm asking the question. To be honest with you, I just did this 2 seconds flat, so obviously, but if I take 46.5 times 7.175, I get $8 million.
The short answer, you can probably answer better than I can, I hope, is that you don't do the math that way, because we use those dollars, okay? We basically bond the whole entire $47 million for the project, and we get aided, okay, at the same time we use the reserve fund to pay down the debt. So it's not a clear cut, we get all the dollars from the state, okay, that's 80%, okay, or 83.2%. We pay our 17%, you get down to the number you're supposed to get to. Okay, it's basically a 15-year process to bond. But Mike, you can probably, that's a complex question, but Mike can probably answer it better.
I would still say, though, that if based on your numbers, you're saying 17.5 is what the reserve is going to cover. If there's $8 million in that reserve, could you, I know we have a Facebook page out there, could you clearly define how $8 million can serve an $8 million project and an $800,000 project? I just would like to clearly understand that.
Really, we're only using 7.1. 7.3, excuse me.
It's 800,000, 800, well, excuse me. Reserve totals 8,130,130, of which the district is going to use 7,300,000 to fund Proposition 1, which leaves even 800,000 for this transportation facility for the next time. Of the 7,300,000 of reserve you're going to use, you're going to bond 30. The difference between 46 and 8 is 36 million. That's going to be your bonding for. That's what you're voting on. How much you're going to bond and finance for. At the same time, the state is going to aid you on the use of the $8 million or in this case, $7.3 million for this project, as if you borrowed the money. The state is going to aid you on the cost of that project as if it was bonded over 15 years, including the monies you have on hand. So that $8 million that you've saved, or the $7 million that you're going to apply to this project, will be aided as if it was $10 million. You're going to receive essentially $10 million, 82% of $10 million back to the district.
Okay, I mean, if we could just put it out so we could do the calculation, just for type math, I think that'd be beneficial.
Jot that down.
Yeah, so I got that as a
Like I looked at it, and then we had several board members had the same exact question. It took me 8 times to figure it out, so I know it's not practical. So I think we can.
Because I guess my other concern there is you're saying you're gonna bond it, there's a 3% interest rate. That sounds like it would be even more costly, but maybe I
I'm
misunderstand.
going to jump on that too. We could use the 3% interest rate assumption in this project as the cost of our money. We've also assumed that the state is going to be aiding you with 3%. That's an offset on that. So the state aids you and assumes what your bonding rate is, 3%. In fact, today's bonding rate for your district, you'd be probably issuing short-term notes for 1 year at a time. This is typically what we're doing for districts. We're borrowing today at less than 1/2 of 1%. So we've built in an assumption of 3%. Yet today, if I had to borrow for this district, you'd be only paying 0.5% of the money. If we borrow at 0.5, and let's assume there's a little bit of room in that, the 0.5 grows to 1% over the next few years. The bond market today, to finance the balance of that over 10 years, today, for your district, for your AA district, I just pulled off the report before I left the office, was 1.9%. So you've built in a 3% interest rate assumption, just for purposes, just to make sure we're covered. With a market that's going to, in today's economy, would generate a cost to the district of less than 2%.
Okay, so just to summarize, in action is just if you could provide that calculation, and it does sound like, just to repeat what you said, over the entire life, 15 years of this loan, there is no incremental funds required from district voters in order to fund this. The $8 million reserve does fully fund it.
Because what will be happening is there'll be state aid on that $7.1 million.
I got it.
Does it make sense? No, but that's the way it is. So that's how it's funded.
Okay, and the other question I just had, just real quick, just the questions I had was, in regards to that $8 million reserve that we do have, you indicated that there was a vote in 2008.
Yes.
Now, was that to approve the existence of the pre-existing reserve, or was that to approve creation of a reserve?
Creation of a reserve.
Okay. Because there was, with the monopoly audit, et cetera, there was some concerns there. I'm just making sure, where did the $8 million actually come from? So it's been generated over the last 2 to 3 years.
Right, it came from any budget reserves we may have had on June 30th, before we started the new year. We put money in that capital reserve.
And the voters approved the existence of that.
That's overwhelmingly.
Was that in the May vote? Or was
Yes.
that?
Yeah, it was in the May 20th regular vote.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, you're going to have to bear with me because I'm reading questions here. Have we paid any money to Canada Design to prepare this?
I believe the answer is no. I believe that all the work is being done, right?
All the work is currently being done. It's a partnership with being in the community also.
Yeah, and that raises another good question. People may want all kinds of architectural schematics and those kinds of things. If, and this applies to the construction management people as well, if the project is not approved, then any cost that would be charged to the district for that pre-referendum work would have to be paid out of the local budget with no state aid. If the project is approved, the work will be done by the construction people and the architects as part of the 82.6% reimbursement. So people may want a lot of it. I want to see this, I want to see that. We're not doing that because we would be left taking it dollar for dollar from the local taxpayer if the project is not approved. So they are doing it at no cost.
When is the construction targeted to start, and when is it targeted to finish?
Need your help on that?
Late spring of 2013 with substantial completion summer of 2015.
Okay, thanks. So you indicated you can't spend a penny over 46.5 million. What if?
46,825.
Okay, close enough. What if not fully? What if not state fully funded? What if the state does not fully cover? And we heard that there was a change in the calculation in a prior project. So if it's not fully funded, will it be reduced by the? Will the project be reduced by the amount of lack of funding, or will the levy be increased by the lack of funding because the voters have already approved the 46 point whatever, 47
Let me
million
make clear,
project?
there was a change in calculation. There was not a change in the amount of state aid. There's a big difference between those two. Do you want to?
In fact, the district there is budgetary legislation that if approved on December 20th, as the superintendent said, your building aid ratio will be 82.6%. That's it.
Right.
It will be 82.6%.
Okay, so there's zero risk that that could ever get changed.
That's correct.
That's what I'm
Is-
okay.
But what would happen if that does occur? The state is not in good financial shape
They,
by any stretch of imagination.
but they have to pay their bills.
So
They've been recently, they have not
we're not
done
going to
that.
do this, sorry.
Sorry.
Shut you down.
Yeah.
But I will do a follow-up to satisfy you. And I really ask that we not start asking questions. Please fill out a card, raise your
Sure.
hand. So sorry about that. But just to ask that question again, the reality is New York State's headed for bankruptcy. People might debate that, but that's my opinion. It's in serious dire straits. What is that calculation? Even though it sounds like it can't be changed, what if it is changed? Will it result in a reduction in the cost of the project, or will the levy be increased on taxpayers?
If it's changed, and I don't doubt for 1 second that it will not be, that's something the board would have to talk about.
So I think what would happen, Mike, one of two things. I don't know from a legal standpoint, but one of two things would happen. The board would make a decision, take a look at the whole scope of the project, say, get down to the dollar amount, we're gonna cut this, this, and this. The alternative is, I would think we'd have to go back to the taxpayers and say, in order to increase, tax, we have to come out for a second vote if we want to keep the project as it was approved on December 20th, right?
I think
I don't think
Proposition
there's
1,
any way.
does it
can't
actually
spend-
say that there's no impact on the tax levy?
Yes.
So if it says that, I would think that that would be the requirement.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to clarify
To
that.
what Bob said, I mean, it would be a board decision what we would take. We would not take the decision lightly, so we would involve the community again. If we unfortunately get to that point.
If I could also add, New York State Department of Education has set up this funding model since the 1940s. And during that time, New York State has never reneged on, once the project has gone through referendum and been voted on positively by the community, it's never changed the aid ratio to a community. And keep in mind, there were a lot of years back in the 70s and 80s that were very, very tough for New York State.
So,
In fact, there are still 4-8 ratios being, the state is paying on the historical part of this, that they use to calculate different aid models for districts. If you issued bonds before 1990, you rated at a different rate than you would be today. You still get bonds outstanding, but there's 4 different models of aiding built into the state's budget.
okay, so can we keep going here? The next question I think is a good one is, so there was a reserve that's been generated of $8 million. Obviously, that required an increase in the levy on the taxpayers. Is that going to be reduced, or do we continue to build a reserve for capital projects going forwards that, since you're saying since 2008, it's generated about $8 million, which is a considerable amount of tax money?
Yeah. Well, there is a limit, both in terms of time and amount. It's 10 years and 10 million. So if the board should reach that, then it would be finished. It would be used again for possible future capital projects. The work that is being done now, as Dave mentioned, we were looking at a considerably larger amount. There will be a need at some point in the future for additional work to be done. So right now, I don't know if we will put any additional money into that savings account, the capital reserve account, or not, because we have to take a look at our financial status in June to see whether or not there can be any money that is put into that account.
Just as a point of clarification, I think, is from the standpoint, it was $10 million, right, was what the capital reserve is. Once we get to the 10 million, we can't put another penny in, in order to replace the funds, correct? And once we use
So once we
it's a
use-
one-shot deal, you can't, you know, if we spend this money over the next couple of years, you deplete it down to $1 million or say, $500,000. You can't then add back into it. It's a one, you only go up to $10 million once, and then we have to go back for a second.
So,
additional one.
so that's back on that capital reserve, so that $8 million that was generated relatively quickly, it sounds like. I mean, that's a considerable amount of taxes that it took to build that. So that, it sounds like that's for a 10-year period. So when the voters voted on that, they were aware that they were creating that. I mean, was that actually a referendum that was called out?
Yes,
There was a separate referendum.
Yes.
Okay.
It's all explained, all public notices, and again, I think it was approved 2-1 by the community.
So it's, again, just whether there's any impact on Proposition 1, the voters, and you're saying no. It's not that I'm skipping it. So this one is, will there be regularly scheduled public meetings communicating project status and sub-project cost versus projected cost? And as a reference, you may have heard about Greece, the school, there were some concerns with how Greece managed the project, school district. We just want to make sure that similar errors don't occur in our school district, that we're really closely managing the cost right down to the drinking fountains.
And I'm familiar with that because I came from a district that was relatively close to Greece. And I'm sure that the Board of Education, in its regular meetings, will have financial reports from the construction management people as well as from the architects. So as we got to this while we were having these workshops by the committee, that was a discussion on almost every single board meeting for months. So if the public wants to hear what's going on, come and listen to the information at all the board meetings, or if they're not getting the information they want at the board meeting, they can ask the question at the board meeting. So, or ask the question anytime, we'll get them answers.
What I'd say, and this is again my opinion, the board has not made a decision in this regard, and we will, as we get the project approved, we get into the design phase, as we go forward, just like we had the community committee to help us winnow down what the project was going to be. I think it's essential for the community to be involved in the process. So whatever forms we find are going to be effective to get the input, keep people informed. We've gone down, we started down this path of informing people. We have no intention of going back to that. I mean, I think we need to be transparent, we need to be open, we need as much community involvement in the process, so that at the end, at the end of the day, people feel very good about what we've done, and the fact that we've done what we set out to do under the cost we said we do.
If I could add, like, we have a very active board now. We have another board member with Max, and it was 5, like you're on the left. So that to me speaks volumes to how much we want to interact with details. And we get stuck in a lot of details sometimes. But I feel that if the community wants us to do that, well, one of our board goals is to foster communication with the community. So if that's one of our goals, and this is a huge project for us, I can't imagine us not considering that at all.
So I'm hearing coming out of that, a community committee would have regular review of how the project is progressing.
As Dave mentioned,
We
we haven't decided
discussed it, but we expect that we continue to have the community involved, just like we have. And at this point, up to this point,
Certainly the information.
certainly the information will be available, and we'll, every 2 weeks we meet, and the board has a lot of information and reviews a lot of information from, whatever's going on at that point in time, from the administration, from, our advisors, that'll keep us surprised in terms of where things, that we'll certainly make the public aware of what's going on. Okay.
Are there, so this is back on the reserve, apparently that's a big topic. Are there any other projects other than the 800 that have been discussed for the transportation building? Is there any other projects where that reserve is being discussed to be used?
No.
There's nothing with respect to this particular reserve that's to be used. We expect, just like any other thing, that we will be constantly looking at, the facilities, and, there'll be another project sometime in the future that we have, because that's just the nature of this.
So this one says, and so I'm just gonna read it because it really wasn't covered. So 2.22 billion doesn't sound like a lot of money when considering the number of school districts in the state. Because we're talking about 40,000 or $40 million. I mean, if you multiply that by the number of school districts, that's a tremendous amount of money. Is it, considering that the state's financial condition, is it reasonable to believe that this won't possibly be considered for a cut?
Well, I think it's a big amount of money. 2.2 billion is not a small amount to me. And the reason that it's a little bit smaller is because there have been fewer proposed capital projects in the last the year. If you take a look at the numbers of what has been proposed, it's been going down simply because of the conditions in most of the districts who are going to do their capital projects have already had them voted on and approved, and the work is either being done or has already been completed. And there have been a good number of school districts right around us that have had capital projects approved and the work done. So, I don't know how to answer, because you can always say, what if? Okay, and all we can do is tell you that since 1940, the state has honored every single commitment for the facilities to cover the state aid. They gave us a couple of years ago an additional amount of money because capital project work is important to the state of New York. The construction jobs that are about, that's important to them. They have always funded 100% all the work that's been asked for and approved by the communities to do building project work.
The board is confident that we got it, so.
And then if I may be wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in last year's budget, the one thing that did actually increase was building aid.
Yeah.
Okay, building aid for state projects last
Part of
year.
that was stimulus money though, wasn't it?
I don't believe so, no.
Stimulus.
No, so it actually went up last year, and, obviously, who knows what Albany's going to do, but.
Well, I'd even add, your bond counsel, Hawkins Sellafield in New York, advised me one time, when they asked me this question, the voters are approving a project to spend, in this case, $46 million, and using a reserve, expect that you're going to get 82% aid. That's what you're anticipating. And if that doesn't happen, you don't have the project as adopted. And if there would be a significant change, there would have to be a different result, because you're not obliged to continue a project other than as it was adopted by law.
And sorry, your name is one more time.
Mike Meister, Capital Markets, your financial advisor. Your financial advisor, not your legal advisor. Giving you a legal thing, memo that I learned a few years ago from your attorneys.
Got it. Okay, we got to keep moving here. Please, and I hope you understand this question because I may be missing it, but you may understand it. Please list the main differences from 2009. Do you understand that question?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. The board in 2009 that put that project together prioritized the work that had to be done and went about it in the same fashion as the group here. We had a facility committee, but the board had made a decision that, knowing that we had roughly $100 million worth of work, and knowing that we weren't ever going to be able to fund all of that in one project, the question was asked of the board, what are your priorities? What should we be focusing on? And the board at that time said we need to focus on the high school and the middle school, because all the students will ultimately come through those two buildings. And so the dollars were prioritized in that project for basically the high school, with some of it for the middle school. There were very few dollars for Pegabine Youth, and Sidway. This project here is dealing with the first item, which is all the infrastructure. All the health and safety items are included in this project. And that work was done first. When we saw how much money was left after the board did the health and safety, then we looked at the program needs that we had, and there were program needs in each of the buildings, and those are accounted for leading up to that total of $40 million project. That's one significant difference. Go ahead, Ted.
One thing that should be noted, the board was extremely important to the board to commit to the community that all the items that are listed in the brochure that were going to be accomplished in this. We heard in the last referendum that may not have been the case, but all the information is right there in the trifold of which this board is committed to get accomplished in the referendum.
So, just to continue on that one, elaborate on energy efficiency measures included such as mechanical equipment and lighting, and the code compliance requirements as opposed to niceties.
Well, energy efficiency issues. The boilers are relatively new in the school. We did look at windows and things like that. We also looked at, for example, lighting in some of the classrooms, occupancy sensors and things of that nature. Code required items. One of the large code required items that we were looking at is ADA. For example, over at Sidway.
Explain what that is.
American with Disabilities Act, which is a handicap accessibility throughout the schools, and that's one of the requirements from New York State, and also at the federal level. And what we're looking at, for example, Sidway, the library, has a couple of steps going to it. So getting a child in there or a parent in there becomes a little difficult. Also, getting people on the stages. For example, Sidway, they have a makeshift ramp. So those are the type of code required items. The middle school, for example, has an elevated platform with no railing around it. That's one of the code required items too.
And this person's mentioning there's been a history where work has started and it wasn't meeting code and they had to repeat some of the work or redo some of the work in the past. I don't know how far back this is going. So there's something in place to ensure that that's being done.
Right. What happens is the AE, the architecture and engineer of record, are responsible for making sure that the buildings and whatever's being done is being brought up to code. At that point, it becomes our responsibility to make sure that we're meeting whatever code authority has jurisdiction. In this case, it's New York State Department of Education.
And the state reviews are designed to make sure that those codes are met before the project can go forward.
Okay, next question is, how was the date December 20th determined? A lot of people will be out on vacation, snowbirds, if you know, older folks in particular. How was the board, and it started more than almost a year ago, how did the 20th get selected when considering the community?
It came down to when the work was finally approved by the board. And as Dave mentioned in his presentation, it was the end of October. We have a 45-day prior notice requirement before we can go. So we looked at what the 45 days are, and knowing how long it takes to be able to get the state ed approval, if we miss the next building season, which is the spring and the summer, basically, that you may go another year if you delay that vote. And while there may be snowbirds, we would recommend that every one of them grab a ballot, absentee ballot, and give us a call, we'll send it to you. So there shouldn't be anyone who isn't able to vote no matter where they are.
And where can you get those?
Just call the main district office at 8801.
Yeah, it's also on the website, and I think it's in the brochure.
Yeah.
They'll mail it to you?
We'll send it to you. Yep.
I think it's in the brochure. You've got one.
And there are a list of people that we get from the Board of Elections who have asked that those be sent, and we send those automatically. So I know that in the last few days, we sent out about 75 absentee ballots from people who are on the Erie County Board of Elections list.
for absentee ballots.
For absentee ballots, yep.
It's in a box right here on the, right below the picture of the board.
So this one says, is this capital savings fund over once this money is used for this project, or do you continue to take more money?
Well, it's authorized up to 10 million, and the board makes a decision each June as to whether to put any additional funding in. And so, that's up to the board to decide when they get to June 2012, they'll make a decision either to leave it the way it is or to put some amount of money in. My guess is that there won't be additional funding put in because of the dealing with the regular budget. We would need to have probably that money used for other expenses.
Two-part question. First is for the transportation facility, the 800,000. Does that require a voter referendum, and why? If not, why not?
It absolutely does require it, and any expending of funds like that requires voter authorization. So once we have a location determined, once we get those cost estimates, once we get the environmental study done, that will come to the residents to vote on that as an item, and I don't know when that will be, because we haven't found a site yet. We're looking at probably 6 different sites for that, and they need to be centrally located.
So that'll be a separate vote.
Yes, separate
question.
vote.
So there's other questions here, but I'm going to pass them because that'll be a separate future discussion.
Future meeting.
Future meeting. Any of the items on the list of building enhancements seem frivolous, especially in light of the severe recession we are in. Wi-Fi, new acoustics, and a whole new engineering addition. And the students only requested an additional saw. Is there a separate budget for these basic items?
Yes, we do have items in the budget to purchase saws, but the technology program that we have is one of the finest around. And our students have done extremely well in all facets of science and engineering and technology. And we are in a pre-engineering program affiliated with the University of Rochester that a number of other school districts are part of. We have reached a limit. We have students who would give their right arm to be able to participate in the engineering program, but they can't because there's no more space. We have 3 technology rooms. Those rooms are used every single period of the day by all of those classes, and we can't enroll any more students because there's no place to go. I would encourage you to take a look at any of the 3. Go in and take a look at any of the 3 to see what they look like, because there's a show on TV, I don't know what it's called, where something about you've got to unstuff the garage, whatever that show is. They're hoarders, I think it is. Shows you what I watch on TV. But if you look at those tech rooms, those rooms are just jammed with all kinds of materials because there is no place to put them. And we would very much, as part of this project, be able to have the only expansion of the footprint is in the technology classroom. We're not expanding the footprint, the size of the school, for anything other than technology. The other thing I will tell you is that we have, in our technology engineering classes, about 40% of them are female, which is one of the highest percentages of any high school. Why is it? Because we have outstanding teachers that are encouraging our students to become involved in math, science, and technology engineering. So we have a pent-up demand from the students, and we think that our students deserve to have better classrooms than the one they're being educated in right now.
And we looked at a number of different alternatives to expand the schools in a lot of different ways. Okay, I mean, there was a list of various things that could have been done and could have been part of this project. And the board, along with the community members that were involved, prioritized those to determine what they felt was necessary to make our schools what they should be. Okay, and the technology wing was one of the priorities based upon what the district has done and where things are going.
So just as a follow-up on this, because I think part of their emphasis was really on the frivolous, the chip paint, the rusty door. They listed a number of things. It really looks like preventive maintenance, and that's a lot of what the pictures are on the website currently. How can you use that? Wouldn't that fall under preventive maintenance? And why is it not being preventive maintenance as opposed to being put into a capital budget?
It's not preventive maintenance. You want to talk about the difference between preventive maintenance and
So just as an example, a hole in the wall and chipped paint and a rusty door.
we would fix that. Wouldn't be part of a capital project.
Those are pictures that are.
Those are items that need to be repaired with. And what we're looking at is, for example, when you have a door that's painted and things like that, it's not a matter of just repainting the door, it's a matter of also making a complete replacement of the door itself. So it doesn't fall under kind of maintenance. There are some items that when you look at painting and things like that, those are minor, they may seem like they're minor items, but sometimes they entail more involved things. For example, when you look at there might have been a rusty frame that's shown in one of the photographs from one of the bathrooms or something like that. It also involves other things. For example, what caused the rusty frame? Is there a roof leak that caused it and such? So to look at just a quick photo of something and say that this is really kind of just a little maintenance item, there's more to it than just that.
And I think the curriculum piece piles on top of that. I've done a lot of work with the high school principal and tech team. And as an example, this year there were 134 student requests to take classes that had to be denied because there isn't space to serve those students. There's a project Lead the Way that the district leads as best they possibly can with those free spaces, but it does not allow them to run the full program that allows those children to receive college credits. So you have 134 kids who would love to take classes, and they're being told no because there's no space. And that's the start of that true educational justification.
Perfect segue for this question. So the question is, many high-ticket items on the program are additions. Why do the schools need more space when we are only slightly gaining population and may not be gaining youth for the schools? And if you could speak on, are we gaining any population youth-wise?
Would be glad to do that. One of the things that is typical of when you hit this phase of the capital project, you should go back and take a look at the enrollments and then say the enrollments were here and now the enrollments, not in our case, are down, therefore you don't need a building project. What is left out of that discussion is how the requirements of the state for additional credits create a need for additional classes, create a need for additional spaces. For example, it wasn't that long ago that there may have only been one special education class or a couple special education classes because those students were in regular classrooms not receiving the service that they are now required to receive. So now you add 15 to 20 special ed classrooms, the enrollment may be the same or go down, and you say, how does that happen? Well, that's how it happens. Because they have added requirements in all the core areas. There have been additional special education classes that you don't have a choice but to provide, and that causes a need for more classroom space.
Over the last 10 years, has the population of students gone up or down?
The population in Grand Island is probably pretty stable.
For the kids?
For the kids. Yeah, where other districts are going down, it's fairly stable. We had, just as I won't get the exact number, but over 100 new students showed up on the first day of school than we had at the end of school. That's students from other districts, from other states, and they came to Grand Island because of the reputation of the school district. I think lost in this a little bit is the fact that we are one of the most outstanding academic school districts in Western New York. We have ranked consistently in the top 10, and you're there because of a reason. That is community support. We've had really good students. We've had a lot of parental support, but we do extremely well. There's a lot of districts that say, I wish that we could be in the top 10. We're there. We can be better than where we are because the facilities limit what our kids do. We're in the top 5 in science, and that's without the science labs. Can you imagine what they could be if they actually had a classroom that they could do science in? And then, and related to this, and I will stop here, But when people want to sell their house, they want to have a house that people want to come to. And I can't tell you how many people came to us when they registered during the summer and said, we're registering in Grand Island, we bought a house in Grand Island because of the reputation of the school district. If you've got a school district, and you could probably guess what some of them may be, where it's not attractive for a family to locate there, that has an impact on housing values. So if you want to be able to sell your house, there's a direct correlation between the perceived quality of the school district and the value that you may get when you sell that house.
And I don't think people would argue that, but the fact is too that it's not just, we can't just look at our community relative to the surrounding community, we need to look at relative to the surrounding states. Erie County's lost 20,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, we're bleeding jobs, we're bleeding manufacturing, our taxes are too high, and that's really where our concern is.
Okay,
We need to balance both. I mean,
all we can do is take care of Grand Island, get a handful of that.
right. So I would just to emphasize that, I think we need to consider the full picture. Will any of this work be done by non-union contractors?
Could be possible. We have, as part of,
Still paid.
yeah, we
Prevailing
have,
wage, prevailing wage.
right.
You want to help us with that, Russ, we're ready.
Prevailing wage,
So that's
Right.
not, that's not a choice by the district.
New York State requirement is that contractors meet what's called New York State prevailing wage.
Okay.
Okay, and that's, what happens is essentially contractors can bid. If they're what's called an open shop or a union shop, they bid, they compete against each other, and then the lowest responsible bidder is awarded the contract.
Whether they're union or non-union.
Correct.
They'll be
So
paid
we
the
will
same rate.
consider non-union.
Still have to pay.
They'll be
You
paid.
still gotta pay the same way.
We're still at the same. Right, okay. So you would consider a non-union. Got it.
Well, it's who they hire, who the kind,
We
whoever
don't
is
have a
so
choice.
bid.
So the more we have funded mandates from Albany, you know, New York State they tell us to do.
Well, New York State law is a prevailing wage, but that doesn't prevent the school district from selecting a non-union company, is that correct?
We'll
Yeah, just not the
hire,
lowest bidder.
we'll hire the Acme Electric Company to do the work. Who they hire is up to them, but whoever they hire will be paid prevailing wage or union wage.
Like, because the last large capital project, when it was back in '99, rolled out in 2003, that was I believe, a non-union contractor that did it. So, the board at that time made the decision that the contractor was not union. So,
It's gonna be easy to tell because once the work starts, either there'll be a picket line set up or there won't be. Right, Russ?
Absolutely true.
So I think we've answered this one, but I'm just gonna read it anyways. The state has no revenue. Why are we making unnecessary improvements?
These are perceived to be and believed to be necessary. Both by the facility committee that went through item by item and the board that spent almost 9 hours on one Saturday going through every single item, both on the infrastructure and on the program, and then came back the next weekend and put another 3 or 4 hours in on a regular meeting. So every item is accounted for.
Okay, so this question I think just has it a little bit off, so but I'm gonna read it anyways, just so everyone feels that their questions are being answered. The capital reserve will be used for Proposition 1, correct, which is correct. The reserve will be completely depleted. Please clarify how Proposition 2 is funded. When will the capital reserve begin being refunded?
Okay, well, we've talked about not being sure if and when it will be refunded or replenished. But if you take a look at that local percentage, that's 17% of that $4 million figure, 4.6. That is in fact that 0.2% maximum projected increase for the community. That's where it is right there. So between the state aid and that 0.2%, then that fully accounts for Proposition 2.
The state law requires a building condition study every 5 years. Did that 5-year check start ticking on November 2010, or will it begin when all the work is completed?
It has no connection to the work. If you're not doing any work, you still have to do it every 5 years.
We'll need to do one again in 2015, just like we did one in 2005 and 2010.
And every district
And
goes
every
through the same.
district goes through the same process.
The state wants to make sure that their investment is taken care of. That's why they require the investigation of every aspect of their buildings, and the report goes to state ed and is reviewed by their facilities department. So they know whether or not you're taking care of the buildings. Because their taxes, the state taxes, are paying for that upkeep. They want to make sure you're not getting too far away from maintaining the property.
Think of those from the standpoint of when the project goes to the SEP, they look at the building condition survey to make sure that the ones in those high health and safety are taken care of as part of the project. We're not going to let the project go forward.
There's a number of health and life safety issues that are identified in the building condition survey.
By the state
By
actually
the state.
identifies which are.
Right, which ones they feel are health and life safety items. So what happens is the building condition survey is inputted into the New York State database by January 15th of 2011. Okay, and then what happens is the state has that information. At that point, what happens is when you submit a capital project, you want to make sure that you're not doing all the frivolous things, as far as from whoever wrote that, that they're looking, that the constructors are looking at doing asset preservation. They're looking to maintain their buildings.
That's a good segue for this question. So I think you just answered this, but let's just hear it again. Are the itemized lists set up according to the most important items first, or most expensive first?
Expense had nothing to do with it.
Right.
It was an absolute, what were,
It's neither.
Yeah,
So there is a prioritization based on safety, but
Yeah, we
prioritization.
almost every committee meeting, we said, let's not worry about the dollars, let's get to the prioritization based on, is it health and safety or whatever. So that was the first objective, is to make sure we cover what is required and essential for health and safety, and then the dollars will flow from that.
the committee went through two processes. Okay, one with the building condition survey items, we said that would happen in the springtime, from March through May. Once we got through the building condition survey items, then they went to the academic program of priorities, which was in the handout.
but even before the committee, the work that was done on the building condition survey by Cannon identified
Correct.
what the needs were
Priorities.
according to the
Correct.
criteria set by the state of New York.
Correct. Correct.
So, one question, just to finish what they're asking is, for items where there is a cost overrun, and I'm gonna just paraphrase something you said, you will not go a penny above 46.5 or 80, whatever, $1 million. So you'll just have to reprioritize what you actually can get done within those limitations.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, is there, so is there an inclination to overspend because a lot of this is being funded by the state?
There's no inclination to overspend. Take a look at what our budgets have been the last 3 years. We've had the lowest percentage increases probably of any school district around. We're not spending money frivolously. We are very sensitive to our local taxpayers. And one of the things that we have done through this project is to make sure that every dollar that we're asking for is a dollar that has a purpose. That dollar that has some goal in mind that would be a benefit to the community and to the students.
So, and the second part of this question is, in line with that, is there actually line items for, you've given us a list with line items. Will we manage based on those line items, the costs associated with each one of those sub-projects?
Yes.
And within those projects, will you actually look at the line items to make sure, like in the Greece school district system, just so you know, there was a $150 water pump, it cost $10,000, and over $200,000 of misappropriated money is what the monopoly determined based on an audit. So is there actually a line-by-line review of the cost of items to make sure that things will be appropriately costed and spent?
Our construction management people who who are as good as you'll ever find are the ones that will manage on a day-to-day basis the costs of the project as well as the quality of the work. There will be somebody on site when they pour the concrete to make sure the concrete is proper, when they put the lights in. Those are all things that we have come to expect in our great confidence in our construction management, to make sure that it's done well and it's done under budget.
So right down to the water fountains, there will be line items for all of the expenses. It will be fully transparent as far as where all your dollar went, because that's what happened with the Greece School District was, it wasn't transparent, they did not have that level of detail. So when the Monopoly comptroller audited it, he was unable to really determine where the
If you
line
were to
items.
take a look at the Greece School Board, you would find that the capital project is the least of their problems.
So, let me just go on.
That has nothing to do with this.
Right, so we just want to make sure though that going forward, that doesn't occur for Grand Island. So there will be full transparency right down the line items for expenses. It
Come
will
to
be
the
auditable.
board meetings, we'll have reports.
Okay. Okay, so construction contracts, prevailing rate contracts, yes. Why is the board told students to vote yes on this if on this budget if they are 18 and go home to tell their parents to vote yes?
A board can speak for itself. I don't believe any board member ever told a student to tell their parents to vote yes. If you're 18, you're eligible to vote in New York State. And the students are encouraged to vote the same as their parents, and the same as any other community member who's eligible. You know, we teach citizenship in high school and in the middle school and the elementary. Wouldn't it be disingenuous of us to say it's important to learn democracy, but you have the right to vote, but don't vote? So no one has ever said, I mean, they can speak for themselves, ever said vote yes, because they really can't be running around and saying vote